Well, guys, we are back for another episode of the Liberal Asshole Show, episode 41. And what are today's topics?
Update on the Russo-Ukraine War, Facebook supporting violence against Russians, Bill Maher having too much free time, Bush destroying J.K. Rowling, what produces the most CO2 emissions in America, Ron DeSantis crying about masks, and Dem against stop trending ban.
Alright, so, anyways, it's time to get to the Russo-Ukraine War update as I gotta go get the Wikipedia article. I also found out that, Erdogan, which is Turkey's president, actually had a talk with Putin recently, and he revealed more details of what he wants for Ukraine to give up and end the war. So there's the current map. As nothing's changed right now, as they think that Russia's pretty much stalled at the moment. They might be like sitting back trying to build stuff up before they can try another
That's what
assault.
I reckon they're doing.
So anyways,
they're also calling up forces from one of the breakaway regions in Georgia, Armenia, Syria, etc.
And the death total has not changed since last week, so there's no point to bring that up. So anyways, let's go find it. Oh, according to this Daily Coast article yesterday, Ukraine possibly took back 75 miles of their territory recently, which would be awesome if that's true.
Good.
But now here is the BBC article. Ukraine conflict. Putin lays out his demands in Turkish phone call when he talked to Erdogan recently. On Thursday afternoon, Putin rang up Turkish President Erdogan and told him that Russia's precise demands were for a peace deal with Ukraine. So here's what the deal was. Within half an hour of the ending of the phone call, Erdogan, leading advisor and spokesperson, was part of a small group of officials who listened on to the call. The Russians' demand fall in two categories, alright? So here they are. The first four categories are, according to them, were not too difficult for Ukraine to meet. Chief among them was an acceptance by Ukraine that it should be neutral and should not apply to join in NATO. Volodymyr Zelensky has already conceded this. There are other demands in this category which mostly seem to be a face-saving move for the Russian side. Ukraine would have to undergo a disarmament process to ensure that it wasn't a threat to Russia, whatever that means. There would have to be a protection for the Russian language in Ukraine, which unfortunately Ukraine did language laws recently that discriminate against not just Russians, but anyone that doesn't speak Ukrainian, if you don't know about that. And there is some...
that's going to give ammo to the people who are like, NATO bad, Ukraine bad, therefore Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia are not allowed to have sovereignty.
Yeah, unfortunately, Ukraine did do that. And there's something called denazification. Well, that's new because that wasn't in the terms recently found out, so who knows what that means.
Basically, they mean kill every member of the... Basically, they mean denazify the government, i.e. commit a genocide of their own, because they think that all Ukrainians are Nazis.
This is deeply offensive to Zelensky, who is himself Jewish and some of whose relatives died in the Holocaust, but the Turkish side believes that it will be easy enough for Zelensky to accept. Perhaps it will be enough for you...
Probably just disband the Azov battalion and a couple of the other one or two of the other ones.
Perhaps it will be enough...
I also point out that with Russia, that they should look in their own backyard for Nazis and Islamists.
It would be enough for Ukraine to condemn all forms of neo-Nazism and promise to clamp down on them. The second category is where the difficulty will lie. And in this phone call, Putin said that it would need face-to-face negotiations between him and Zelensky before agreements could be reached on these points, which is what Zelensky wanted too. Has already said he prepared to meet with Putin and negotiate with him one-to-one. They said it was much less specific about these issues, saying simply that they involve the status of Donbass and eastern Ukraine, parts of which have already broken away from Ukraine, stress at their Russianness and the status of Crimea. Although they didn't go into detail, the assumption is that Russia will demand that the Ukrainian government should give up territory in eastern Ukraine that will be deeply contentious. The other assumption is that Russia will demand that Ukraine should formally accept that Crimea, which Russia illegally annexed in 2014, does indeed now belong to Russia. If this is the case, it will be a bitter pill for Ukraine to swallow. Nevertheless, it is a fait accompli, even though Russia has no legal right to own Crimea and actually signed an international treaty after the fall of communism. But before Putin came to power, except that Crimea was part of Ukraine, the Budapest Memorandum, if y'all remember that. Still, Putin's demands are not as harsh as some people feared, and are scarcely seen to be worth all the violence, bloodshed, and destruction which Russia has invited on Ukraine. Given his heavy-handed control over the Russian media, it shouldn't be too hard for him and his accolades to present this as a major victory. For Ukraine, though, there are going to be serious anxieties if the fine details of any agreement aren't sorted out with the immense care. Putin or his successors could always use this as an excuse to invade Ukraine again. A peace deal could take a long time to sort out, even if a ceasefire stops the bloodshed in the meantime. Ukraine has suffered appallingly over the last few weeks, and rebuilding the towns and cities with Russia's damage and destroyed will take a long time. So will rehousing the millions of refugees who fled their homes, which is why the West and the world need to help rebuild them back up. What about Putin himself? There have been suggestions that he is ill or possibly is mentally unbalanced. The Turkish person detected anything strange about him in a phone call? Not at all. He said Putin has appeared to be clear and concise in everything he said, yet even if he does manage to present an agreement with Ukraine as a glorious victory over neo-Nazism, his position at home must be weakened. More and more people realize that he overreached himself badly, and stories of the soldiers who have been killed or captured have already spread fast. So, what do you guys say about this so far? About the terms?
I mean, I think when it comes to Crimea, Donbass, and that, if we could have an independent third-party oversight and have like elections in those areas to decide if they remain with Ukraine, go with Russia, or be independent, both, that would be the best solution. Problem is, I don't see that happening.
I don't see any of this.
Overall, a lot of it's reasonable. A couple is still going to be pretty contentious.
Yeah, I don't see really how anything's going to change anytime soon, unfortunately. But like I said in the last episode, Ukraine, you might want to maybe possibly consider this, because who knows, if you keep waiting, Russia might turn this around, actually win, and make even worse terms for you. So, really, really, really think about that. That's all we can say about that. And hopefully they still keep winning. Alright, so I guess we're on to the next topic now. Facebook supports racism against Russians. As Kyle...
Of course they do.
This is absolutely disgusting. So Kyle covers recently, Facebook is allowing death threats to Russian invaders on there, violating their TOS. So let's see how bad this is.
Facebook has announced a policy change that I want to share with everybody. Facebook allows war posts urging violence against Russian invaders. Okay, let's see what they say. Meta platforms will allow Facebook and Instagram users in some countries to call for violence against Russians and Russian soldiers in the context of the Ukraine invasion, according to internal emails seen by Reuters on Thursday. In a temporary change to its hate speech policy, the social media company is also temporarily allowing some posts that call for death to Russian President Vladimir Putin or Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, according to internal emails to its content moderators. Quote, as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have temporarily made allowances for forms of political expression that would normally violate our rules, like violent speech, such as death to the Russian invaders. We still won't allow credible calls of violence against Russian civilians, a Meta spokesperson said in a statement. The calls for the leaders' deaths will be allowed unless they contain other targets or have two indicators of credibility, such as the location or method, one email said in a recent change to the company's rules on violence and incitement. Citing the Reuters story, Russia's embassy in the United States demanded that Washington stop the extremist activities of Meta. Quote, users of Facebook and Instagram did not give the owners of these platforms the right to determine the criteria of truth and pit nations against each other, the embassy said on Twitter in a message that was also shared by their India office. The temporary policy changes on calls for violence to Russian soldiers apply to Armenia, Azerbaijan, Estonia, Georgia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Russia, Slovakia, and Ukraine, according to one email. In the email recently sent to moderators, Meta highlighted a change in its hate speech policy pertaining both to Russian soldiers and to Russians in the context of the invasion. Quote, we are issuing a spirit of the policy allowance to allow T1 violent speech that would otherwise be removed under the hate speech policy. A, targeting Russian soldiers except prisoners of war. B, targeting Russians where it's clear that the context is that Russian is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Content mentions the invasion, self-defense, etc. It said in the email. Quote, we are doing this because we have observed that in this specific context, Russian soldiers is being used as a proxy for the Russian military. The hate speech policy continues to prohibit attacks on Russians, the email stated.
Even though it said the opposite at the beginning, but okay.
Let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. And by the way, they went on, as you can see there, they go on to say Russia said it was banning Facebook in the country in response to what it said were restrictions of access to Russian media on the platform. So Facebook blocked like RT and Sputnik, and Russia says, okay, we're going to block.
Yeah, but even America blocked them. I actually tried to go on RT's YouTube channel. It says not allowed to now.
Facebook.
Fucking
we got the
wrong.
news the other day that Russia's also banning Instagram. They banned all their independent media as well. So there's censorship everywhere, deplatforming everywhere. You know, there's a real crackdown happening now because of the war. So let's talk a little bit about this policy. Now, everybody's reaction, at least insofar as I've seen, is to say, like, Jesus Christ, this is terrible. You shouldn't do that. My issue with it is a little bit different. The only issue here is that this isn't applied equally across the board. So in other words,
that is true
if you're going to allow people to say death to the Russian invaders, you should also allow people to say, like, death to the Azov battalion or death to Ukrainian neo-Nazis and things of that nature. But they're not doing that. In fact, what I have here, I have another story here, which says Facebook is reversing its ban on posts praising Ukraine's far-right Azov battalion, report says.
Which is wrong.
Now, I don't know the rules. If you praise the Russian invasion...
I'm going to say it right now. Pause quickly. I hope that the Azov and Krakow battalions wipe each other out.
Same here.
Down those comments,
because the Azov battalion is the neo-Nazi Ukrainian group. That's the group that a lot of tankies are using to claim that all Ukrainians are neo-Nazis. And then there's the Krakow battalion, which is the Russian Nazi battalion.
Yes, please kill each other.
I pull those down. You have to leave up the post praising the Azov battalion. So the issue here is that there is no equal application. They're not actually creating a standard and then applying that standard. The issue is they're just doing carve-outs for Russia in particular. And so they say, like, yeah, you could call for violence against Russia, but if you can't call for violence against the Azov battalion or violence against, Ukrainian neo-Nazis, another good example here would be for the U.S., like when we invaded Iraq. Should you be allowed to say death to the American invaders or death to the American imperialists? I would argue yes. If you're in the Palestinian territories, are you allowed to say death to the Israeli occupiers? I would argue yes. The only thing that should really cross a line is direct threats of violence. And so, there has to be a certain degree of specificity or credibility to the claims. If you just broadly say death to X, I mean, it's still not a good thing to say, and you shouldn't say it. It's bad. But at the same time, it doesn't quite reach that level of ban-worthy, in my opinion. And so the issue here is not the policy. I think the policy is fine. The issue is that the policy is not equally applied. And so there's a specific carve-out. You're allowed to call for more violence against, quote, Russian invaders than you are against anybody else. And, you would understand a situation where, say, a Rohingya Muslim living in Myanmar says death to the Myanmar government or whatever, But my guess is, again, it's just specific carve-outs for Russia, and that shows you this is just part of that hysteria that we've talked about, which is now Russian cats are banned from cat shows. Now, Russian vodka and alcohol is banned in over 10 different states. There's a number of these stories that are just jarring. Another one is the Belarusian and Russian athletes in the Paralympics are banned. I mean, come on, the Paralympics, that's like the special needs handicap Olympics, and like, what the hell do those people do? They didn't do anything wrong. Why are you blaming them for what Vladimir Putin does and for what the Russian government does? It doesn't make any sense at all. So this is just part of that mania and that hysteria. So that leads me to say, this is terrible, this is not a good thing. But again, I wouldn't have an issue with it if it was just like general, non-specific, broad calls for violence against, various things, as long as it's not civilians. That would be a fine policy. Again, in the U.S., we have, on paper, the most rigid, free speech protections in the world. And you're basically, it's very hard to prove any sorts of violations of our free speech protections, one of the things would be direct threats of violence would violate it. But, stress on the term direct, like it has to actually be direct. And these broad calls are not direct. But again, there is a problem here, and the problem is it's not a policy that's applied objectively and fairly. It's carving out specifics for just Russia. And that also shows you, of course, that a lot of these U.S.-based companies are sort of just in bed with the American government, and whatever the American government wants them to do, they do. And this is a great example of it right here. Hey, y'all.
Interesting take that Kyle did. I wasn't expecting that, him pointing out, because that is true to hypocrisy. But we gotta also point out that he even said that too in the article. It said you can't target Russian civilians. Yeah, at the beginning it said Russians. That also implies civilians too. And I'm sure you noticed it too. But ever since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there has been mass racism and violence against Russians all over the world. And it's wrong, and it's disgusting. Just like how everyone of East Asian ancestry had to deal with racism with COVID, just like how Muslims and anyone that was Middle Eastern had to deal with racism after 9/11. Stop going after Russians because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's just racism, and it's wrong. Get it for your fucking heads. So what you gotta say about what Kyle talked about, and this stupid, horrible policy.
That is terrible.
And this dumb policy too. Of course, Facebook would support violence if it's convenient for them, and of course, they're violating their TOS. They're violating their own TOS.
Facebook loves violence, and that's why there should be violence against Facebook.
Oh my God! So yeah, please don't actually promote violence against Russians. Please, people. Not just on Facebook, but anywhere. It's just wrong and xenophobic. Alright, So now, on to the next topic. Bill Maher is being an idiot. Bill Maher
continuing his transition to a far-right fuckwit.
So, anyways, Bill Maher recently had a panel on where they were talking about the Don't Say Gay bill, and he has gone pretty much ignorant on this. I wouldn't say he's... Because we're going to watch Mike's video. At the end, he outright says he's like a social conservative now. I don't think he's that. I think he's more just ignorant on this. And like an elitist prick. Because a lot of people that are wealthy as him don't understand any of this.
Remember though, he's an elite. Therefore, we have to be as uncharitable as possible to him.
Yep.
And you can make shit up about him as well.
Yep. So, here we go. And it's also a very good topic, too, about the Don't Say Gay bill, which I think we covered in the last episode, but Mike goes into great detail in this one.
So, not too long ago, Bill Maher insisted that he hasn't actually shifted to the right. Contrary to popular belief, he's still the same person he's always been. He's saying a lot more right-wing talking points now and sounds more and more like a Fox News host every single episode that he hosts. But I mean, it's really everyone else that's changed while he's stayed the same. He's still the center-left liberal that he's always been. Okay, well, let's check in on Bill Maher. What is he talking about here? Well, in the latest episode of Real Time, he talked about Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. And he's going to defend this bill's existence. And not only that, he's going to justify the existence of the Don't Say Gay bill by invoking critical race theory. Now, is he going to point out that critical race theory is a manufactured bullshit culture war issue that the GOP used to gain support? No, he's going to say, well, because liberals are so disingenuous when it comes to CRT and because the right-wingers have a point here, maybe it's also the case that they have a point when it comes to this Don't Say Gay bill. So, let's take a look.
Somebody asked this, is Florida's Don't Say Gay bill designed to trap Democrats into saying they support teaching young children about sexuality? Is the question, but we can broaden that to anything about that. I mean, I was reading about it today. I mean, if people don't know, this is something Desantis is about to sign. And I guess it's a reaction to Republicans who feel that there's too much talk in lower grades. I think it's only, they're talking about kindergarten to third grade. So we're talking about very young kids who, as always with this stuff, there's not like there's no kernel of truth in that maybe kids that young shouldn't be thinking about sex at all. I don't think it's... I think don't say... It's not like you're not allowed to literally not say gay. But they just don't want teachers talking about it. They think it's the province of parents. What do you think?
I mean, by that logic, I guess you can't talk about heterosexual couples then, too.
What do you think, Frank? I'm curious.
I mean, that sounds reasonable on the face of it. I mean, I'm not. My main concern as a gay man who advocates for gay rights is not that second graders know who Harvey Milk is. That is not the key. That is not the key to LGBTQ equality. But I mean, I also question, I mean, does this really need to be at the top of these politicians' lists?
Right.
I mean,
Of course, because Republicans have nothing else to talk about.
It's a legend.
This is not going to improve Floridians' lives. This is not an urgent problem. This is a dodge. It's another culture war that's meant to score cheap, easy points rather than really solving Americans' problems. That's all.
Well,
I don't know if this. I went to the bill also.
But seriously, do we know that this was an enormous problem, pervasive in Florida schools?
no, but like
This reeks to me of something that happened on a few occasions and has been blown in.
Well,
Yes.
I don't,
That's exactly how it is.
The same with the CRT thing. I feel like it's disingenuous when the liberals say, we just want to teach history. And like, no one's against that. Well, I'm sure there are some fucking rednecks who are against that.
And a lot on the right.
Most people are not against realistically teaching history.
Conservatives are, Bill. That's where you're ignorant.
It's not like you can't mention slavery. They're talking about something else that is going on. I've read too many first-person reports from teachers who say, I can't go on teaching like this because this is insanity what I'm doing in this classroom, separating kids by race and oppressors and non-oppressors, and they're little kids. It is going on. I don't know what is going on with the gender as much. Let me read what part of the bill. It says, the measure would, this is from CNN, would require districts to adopt procedures for notifying a student's parent if there is a change in the student's services or monitoring related to the student's mental, emotional, physical health or well-being. Okay, then it says something LGBTQ advocates argue could lead to some students being outed to their parents.
Yeah, that is a
That
fear.
phrase struck me as odd.
Yeah.
Like, outed to parents? Like, shouldn't parents know everything anyway?
Bill, I'm sure Mike's going to point... but I think Mike does point this out. But here's the problem. Because there are a lot of parents that are straight up homophobic, like religious fundamentalists and stuff like that. And if they don't know that their kid may be gay or not, they even a kid might not know.
Exactly.
But if the kid might realize that they are gay, they can't just come out to their parents because they might beat them up, disown them, even kill them and stuff like that. Stuff like this, you have to keep it a secret. Just keep the kids safe.
The concept of
I think that fell out of the bill. I think that's actually
No, the one that I read right before the show was that the vast majority of the bill is about that. Is about parents' right to know if their child is identifying, changing the way that they're, presenting. If the teachers aren't identifying this kind of thing.
I think in California, the school has more of those rights than the parent.
I mean, he literally just sounds like a Fox News host. If you took what he said there...
Like I said, Bill Maher, it's not that everyone's going to the left, it's that you're more and more becoming a far-right fuck now.
I wouldn't say he's a Fox News host, Mike. I would say more he's just an out-of-touch elitist.
and told me it was a quote from Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham, I wouldn't question it because he just sounds like a Fox News host.
No, Hannity and Ingram would say something way, way worse than anything Bill just said there.
It's astonishing that he still maintains that he hasn't shifted to the right, that he's not a conservative. And he's still saying this. There's an update, so we'll talk about that later on. But let's address the bill itself. So he claims that, you know, the prospect of children being outed because of this bill is, you know, not necessarily a bad thing, because when we're talking about kids that young, ages kindergarten through third grade, of course the parents should know everything. And in theory, that's true. Of course, you want the teachers to communicate how their child is developing. That makes a lot of sense. But in the context of this homophobic Don't Say Gay bill, think about the implications of why that could be dangerous. You know, if you're in third grade or second grade, you're not going to come out and say, hey, I'm gay. I mean, maybe there are kids who do that, but they're not just going to come out and say, hi, I'm a homosexual. In second grade, I acknowledge this. That's extremely, extremely rare.
I mean, I didn't even know I was straight until I was 11, for crying out loud. What about you?
Wow.
Yeah, most kids don't know about, like, their sexuality that late. Early. It's very rare.
Right? But where it gets dangerous is perhaps the teacher notices that your son isn't really hanging out with his male classmates. He's not playing sports. In fact, he's hanging out more with his female classmates, playing with dolls, playing house, and...
Oh, come on. Who would actually think a kid is gay because of that? That is the stupidest stereotypical reason ever. If anything, that's pretty misandrist and misogynistic. God, I didn't play sports really when I was a kid, and I did play, like, Barbie and Dollhouse when I was hanging out with women. Yeah, and we're straight, for crying out loud. It has nothing to do with that. Like, Jesus Christ, who's stupid enough to actually think this, for God's sake?
You know, he's acting a little bit effeminate. So if you are instructed because of this bill to tell parents about this, and that kid has a homophobic parent who then beats his child
as I was pointing out,
he's acting like a sissy or a little bit too effeminate, you could potentially endanger children here. And the bill is bad because it otherizes same-sex couples. If you are a kid who has two mommies or two daddies, well then you're not going to be allowed to talk about it. If you're a teacher in Florida with a same-sex spouse, or if you're a transgender person who teaches, well then you can be penalized because of this bill if you happen to mention that. So the bill is unnecessary.
Yeah, that's the problem too. People can't talk about if they have gay parents or stuff like that, or if they're gay or something like that, when there's nothing wrong with it.
It's discriminatory.
Exactly.
It's no different than people having heterosexual parents. Like, I don't know about you, when I was in school, I had no problem talking about my mom and dad. What about you?
Not really, except for the difference that my family breached gender roles in kindergarten. My dad was the breadwinner. My dad's not the breadwinner. My mum is. My dad's the one that stays home and raised me.
But yeah, there's, like, if everyone could talk about their heterosexual parents and no one would bat an eye, that also needs to apply for gay people too.
And it treats gay people as if they are the other, and LGBTQ plus people, more broadly speaking, as if they're the other. That's why good people oppose it. But the framing of that question there was actually pretty savvy. Whoever submitted that question to Bill Maher knows more than him, because they asked, is Florida's Don't Say Gay bill designed to trap Democrats into saying they support teaching young children about sexuality? And the answer is yes. There are many reasons to oppose that bill. But people who oppose this bill don't oppose this bill because they believe that when you go to first grade, that's when you should begin teaching kids about homosexuality. Nobody supports that. But that's exactly the framing that the right is using to demonize people against this bill. For example, look at the chyrons from a recent airing of Laura Ingram's program on Fox News. It says, liberals are sexually grooming elementary students. And this second one here says, Dems happy to run on pro-grooming platform. So the idea is, if you oppose this bill, it must be because you want to teach children about sex, because you want to groom them, because you want to date them. They're literally reviving the gays or pedophiles trope.
Classic homophobic trope. I remember them back in the 2000s. Do you remember those?
Yes, I remember that.
He's saying, actually, maybe we shouldn't teach kids about sexuality. Who wants to teach kids about sexuality? Of course, at that age, we shouldn't be teaching kids about sexuality. But that's not what this is about. People are opposed to this. Good people are opposed to this because it's discriminatory, and it can lead to unforeseen consequences that hurts potentially gay kids or kids with same-sex parents. It's just ridiculously unnecessary and homophobic. Now, Frank Bruni, the gay guy on the panel, very clearly wasn't prepared to answer this question. He says, my main concern is not that second graders know who Harvey Milk is, but does this really need to be at the top of these politicians' lists? Now, he's right that this is a manufactured culture war issue, right? But he very clearly wasn't prepared to push back. To be fair to him, I don't think that they were prepared to answer this question. This was something that an audience member had submitted to Bill Maher, so they kind of discussed this.
Which, unfortunately, a lot of liberals are just not good at answering this kind of stuff.
But nonetheless, Bill Maher, you know that he went wrong here when he invoked critical race theory. So he claimed that liberals are disingenuous when they say that, we just want to teach history. Not critical race theory, but then he invokes that anecdote that is popularly referred to when people talk about critical race theory. How teachers are forcing students to line up or differentiate between oppressors and the privileged, yada, yada, yada. Except everybody thinks that that's stupid.
Mike? No, there are many on the left and liberals too that actually don't see that that's stupid, sadly. And that's where the problem with a lot of the left have on this issue. They just don't do a good job at condemning it like you and us. And then before they become an argument for the right about how big this is, and therefore that's why we gotta stop having CRT being taught completely. Like, both of you guys are just in the wrong. You have to acknowledge that this is bad, and it's way more basically, the left thinks this is, like, never happened, which it is, whereas the right thinks it's, like, literally everything is this when it's not. They're both wrong. It's not happened every single place, but it's happening enough that it's a concern that needs to be condemned and talked about.
Right? That's an anecdote. Is this really a widespread phenomenon that's happening across the country? And you see, the actual architect of this manufactured controversy, critical race theory, Christopher Rufo, he already admitted that the goal is to paint any and everything as critical race theory and make anything that they want to be toxic linked to critical race theory, because that is a good political technique to use.
And that's where the conservatives are stupid.
The efficacy of this strategy. So it is the case that conservatives are essentially equating history with critical race theory, because critical race...
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about earlier. That's why conservatives don't want any American history that makes America look bad, like racism. They don't want to talk about that. They don't want
everything with critical race theory at this point.
Theory is not being taught to children. This is a legal theory that is taught at the postgraduate level. I didn't encounter critical race theory until I was in a PhD program. So we're not teaching kids about this. If kids are having to select who's oppressed and who isn't, that's not critical race theory. That's just
that isn't CRT, but unfortunately, the people that do that stuff, they do think it's CRT, and then they are used by the right as example. See, here's CRT going amok again.
Teacher who is stupid, teaching a dumb lesson that's not going to teach kids anything. But nobody's saying that that's good. What we're saying...
Like I said, there are a lot on the left, especially a lot of idiot leftists I've ran to over the last few months that do actually defend that. And Vosh has had to deal with them over the last few months too.
Is that one anecdote does not mean that this is a widespread occurrence.
But it's also not necessarily an anecdote either. It's enough that it's a big problem.
And it's a little bit unnecessary and hysterical to create an entire manufactured outrage movement over a couple of anecdotes. And see, this is the way that conservatives bait normal people into supporting their dumb fucking wedge issues. They'll say, oh, well, look at this one example of this teacher who said this or did this. So therefore, we need a whole outrage movement over this. This is how they keep normal people to vote against their own self-interest. This is how they keep conservatives in their corner. And of course, Bill Maher, like the conservative that he is, took their bait hook, line, and sinker. You can condemn anecdotes, but to suggest that because of one or two anecdotes, there's an entire trend going on, well, that's conservative reactionary thinking, Bill Maher.
No, it's just him being a wealthy elitist prick that's ignorant on this and has too much free time.
But I mean, Bill Maher, he recently talked about whether or not he's actually conservative. So he appeared on the
honestly.
True.
Ben Shapiro show. Now, just stop for a moment and think about that. He's not going on the Brian Tyler Cohen show. He's not going on TYT. He's not going on a Hassan stream.
I don't know. Okay, Mike, I don't know who that first person is you're talking about. Hassan's a fucking idiot, so why would Bill want to even talk to him? He probably doesn't even know who he is. And you do know he and TYT have massive beef with the Sam Harris debacle years ago, remember?
Yeah.
Remember they called him an Islamophobe? Do you remember that?
Yep.
Why would Bill want anything to do with TYT when they called him that? Like, I'm sure like if someone called us like a white supremacist or stuff like that, I don't think we would want to talk with them. Would you? Other than to make fun of him or something like that?
I've really interacted with Harry anymore. Basically cut Harry out because of this.
Like, no one was going to want to talk to someone who keeps calling them, like, isms and stuff like that. So, yeah, it makes sense that he wouldn't want to talk to TYT.
Going on the Ben Shapiro show for an hour.
Whereas Benny Boy, he's had him on the show before, and Benny Boy acts reasonable enough in Bill's eyes to be considered reasonable to talk to. That's why.
Plus long interview because that's where he feels the most comfortable. And he's going to talk about whether or not he really is conservative now. And he's going to insist that he still hasn't changed, even though we just saw him argue in favor of the homophobic Don't Say Gay bill. Take a look.
Look, I haven't changed at all. My politics hasn't changed. They've changed. People say to me sometimes, have you changed? No. It's that 5 years ago, no one was talking about defunding the police. I never heard that phrase 5 years ago. That's not me changing. That's things changing. I'm reacting to it, as I've always been. Letting 3-year-olds decide what gender they are. This wasn't something 5 years ago. Free speech, used to be a left-wing thing that we were proud and owned, and now that seems to be under attack. So
yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the left do. That's
both sides on that one.
Yeah, unfortunately, he is right in that regard. A lot on the left are against free speech, but so is the right too, which I would hope he would acknowledge that.
I think I've stayed the same.
So the examples that he uses are incredibly stupid. It's something that you would expect a simpleton to say, not a seasoned political pundit.
Well, yeah, because he's a wealthy elitist prick that has too much free time on his hands. It's pretty obvious to me.
He says, defund the police is a new political slogan popped up. I guess that's evidence that the left has shifted even further to the left, and that Democrats have shifted to the left.
Democrats are against defund the police. We even covered the polls on even though they were the biggest supporters of defund the police, it was only like 30% of Democrats that even supported the phrase or even maybe the policy. So the majority of Democrats are against defund the police.
Do you just not like the slogan? Do you think there's any merit to the claim that police departments have incredibly bloated budgets and maybe they shouldn't have giant budgets with military gear? I mean, do you think that that's just something that people are bringing up because they don't want there to be police? You have to really go...
And I'm pretty sure I remember when I used to watch him years ago, he actually did say he was against police having that kind of stuff.
A little bit further when you're talking about why you have an issue with this, but notice how there's no nuance here. He says, letting 3-year-olds decide what gender they are, this wasn't something 5 years ago. I don't even know what that means. What does that mean? Is this a common phenomenon where we are allowing children at the age of 3 to transition? We're giving them hormone replacement theory, sex changes. What do you mean by that? Because I don't know what he means by that.
I'll tell you what he means. He probably saw the idiots on the left that actually do promote that stuff, and then he saw the idiots on the right that promote it like this thing is happening every single where. Like I said, ignorant and naive.
Does this mean that, if you see a child...
What?
But also that he is moving to the right as well.
Well, he definitely is a neo-lib, unfortunately, if you remember that.
Play with girl toys. If your son is playing with Barbies, you slap him and you tell him that he's a fag. Does that mean that you're not letting your child transition, or if...
Who's serious? I still would like to see who seriously would make a big deal about what toys kids play. Like, God, remember we talked about this when California made, required non-binary toy sections, remember that? I would really like to see someone make a big deal about this. Like, who gives a shit what toys kids want to play with? God.
You are letting your son play with Barbies or girl toys. Does that mean you're letting him be transgender? What do you mean, Bill? And see, he never explains any of this because all of it is reactionary garbage. He's not going to dive into the details and talk about the substance here because there is no substance or merit to what he's saying here. He also says free speech used to be a left-wing thing, and now it's under attack. How? You just defended the Don't Say Gay bill. Isn't that a little bit censorious?
Yep,
no?
There you go. True as well.
But he's saying this to somebody like Ben Shapiro, and I'm assuming that he's paying credence to the claim that on social media, right-wingers are being silenced, whereas if you looked up the daily top 10s for Facebook, the person who he's talking to, Ben Shapiro, dominates on a daily fucking basis. So, again, there's no merit to that, and even if big tech is censoring conservative voices, which they are not, but even if they...
Well, they are, but they're not doing it as much as the right says us, and they are censoring the left, too.
That isn't a First Amendment issue. That's an issue of how do we regulate big tech. Should we treat them as public utilities? Should we nationalize them? There you go. What do you mean by that? Because I don't know what he means by that.
Well, they are, but they're not doing it as much as the right says us, and they are censoring the left, too.
Should we regulate big tech? Should we treat them as public utilities? Should we nationalize them? Everything he's saying is conservative right-wing talking points, but he simultaneously will deny that he's conservative. No, I haven't changed. Everyone else has changed. It's the left who really has gotten a little bit too extreme.
And the proof that there's so much censorship, look how much censoring of like Russian-based media they've done since Russia invaded Ukraine. Like I said earlier with RT, that I can't watch RT now because I'm American.
Now, he says this within the same week of right-wingers in Florida passing a bill to form election police, where Texas is investigating parents with trans teenagers as
And I think we covered both of those horrible things.
child abusers. I mean, the right has become so authoritarian that in some states, they're passing bills that allow them to subvert the will of voters. So if they see an election go the way that they don't like, they can send their own electors, rogue electors, to the electoral college.
I can't find RT either.
Yeah. So they probably banned him down there too.
To overturn the will of the people. So as the right gets more and more authoritarian, more conspiratorial, more anti-vax, Bill Maher says actually it's the left. They're the ones who have gotten more extreme, not the right in this country. But yet, I haven't changed. I'm not more conservative. I might parrot all of their talking points, but it's not me, it's you. No, Bill. Denying isn't going to change the fact that you're just a standard conservative now. See, he used to be more economically conservative, but socially liberal. But as time has gone on...
Actually, I remember him being both progressive.
He's just socially conservative now.
Yeah, see where he says, like, Mike says that Bill's a social conservative. I don't think he's that far. I would want to see what he says, like, on abortion or gay rights recently, because I know for a fact he's supported them over the years. So, just because he says stupid stuff about, like, transgender does not necessarily mean he's a full-blown social conservative. I want to see a lot more evidence about him being, like, pro-life or anti-gay marriage before I would say that. That's why I think Mike goes a little bit too far in that one.
Too. And he could prove me wrong by denouncing these culture war issues where the GOP tries to otherize and discriminate against LGBTQ plus people, but he's not doing that because he agrees with them. So he can try to deny that he is a conservative at this point, but it's just getting comical. I mean, imagine being so narcissistic to think that you haven't changed ideologically. Literally everyone else in the country has changed. Imagine thinking that. Imagine being that arrogant. So Bill Maher is delusional, and he's also a conservative. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. So Bill, you can pretend all you want that you're still a center-left liberal, but you've changed, not everyone else.
So yeah, what do you guys say about that one? At least it was nice to learn more about the Don't Say Gay bill and how awful it is.
Definitely, yeah.
So, what would you have to say about Bill Maher in that one?
I'd say he's both an out of thing idiot, and also that he is actually moving to the right.
He definitely was back in 2020 when he supported Cloud Boot Jar.
Because both of his girlfriends lost.
Cry more. It's pretty sad how you were a Bernie bro, Mar. Then all of a sudden you flipped on that one. That's pretty bad. But I don't think he's like full-blown socially conservative like Mike says he is. I think it's more if he's just an out-of-touch elitist prick that has too much time on his hands to go on social media to see idiots on the left and right make fools of himself. Alright, so enough talking on that. Now to go destroy another idiot, as we're going to watch Vosh destroy J.K. Rowling. Oh boy, this is going to be fun, as we're going to watch Hunter Avalon for the first time in a while.
Yes.
So this is the new drama recently that Vosh had to deal with because he made fun of J.K. Rowling being a TERF. And he got called a misogynist for it too because he said a funny misogynistic joke. So here we go. Let's watch Hunter's video.
Who here had Vosh versus J.K. Rowling on their 2022 bingo cards? I'm guessing very few.
He's been going
after
for years.
Now I did, because I'm smart and I can see the future. But I'm guessing that none of you had that on your bingo cards. Yet alas, here we are. Vosh, streamer, YouTuber Vosh, beefing with J.K. Rowling. We're going to talk about all of this and why this happened, okay? So, first, let's talk about the controversy involving J.K. Rowling. Now, of course, as we know, J.K. Rowling is very dumb. She is a massive TERF, and she weaponizes partially her own abuse that she's experienced to try and bludgeon trans people.
How
and
heinous
strip
can
them
you
away
be
of
to do
their
that?
rights and recognizing that trans people are valid. It's very sad, and it's really a disgusting way to go about things, because we can recognize that J.K. Rowling may have suffered abuse at one point, but her oppression does not justify her bigotry. It's quite simple. This came to a boiling
Careful,
point
Hunter. He might call you misogynist for saying that.
when J.K. Rowling started to criticize a reform bill that makes it easier for trans people to legally change their gender.
Oh, the
Now,
horror!
this took place in Scotland. The reformation here of this bill, I feel like it would actually make TERFs happy. It's still
But
very
TERFs are never
strict.
happy.
So let's go ahead and read.
They're
current-
evil.
All they do is whine about it every day, like Bill Maher does, as we just saw.
Process.
Because
Whinges.
just like Maher, Rowling's an out-of-touch elitist prick or a cunt.
For receiving a gender recognition certificate dictates that applicants have to be medically diagnosed as having gender dysphoria. So this is a little bit problematic only because of the fact that, of course, not all trans people have gender dysphoria. So there's that. They need to go through a minimum 2-year process and be aged over 18. So that's the current policy for if a trans person is seeking to change their birth certificate, or, just receiving a gender recognition certificate. Now, let's hear about what the new one is that J.K. Rowling is really terrified about. Under the proposed legislation, applicants would be required to live in their gender for at least 3 months before applying for a certificate, which would then be issued after another 3-month reflection period.
Jeez,
So
6 months.
6 months before you even get the certificate, applicants would have to swear they intend to live as their gender for life, as any false claim would be a criminal offense carrying a prison sentence of up to 2 years. So a lot of the TERFs, they like to fearmonger that, like, some burly dude with a giant beard and massive muscles who's just oozing testosterone is going to be like, yo, what's up? I'm actually a woman, bruh. And then they're going to just put that guy in, like, an all-female prison where he can go crazy on a big, giant rape rampage. That's a lot of the times what TERFs like to strawman about these issues. When here we have the proposed new legislation would literally put people who lie about their gender identity in prison for 2 fucking years. That's a pretty harsh penalty, dude. Now, of course,
Too harsh, maybe, if
J.K.
anything.
Rowling went on a big tangent. Pretty much the same thing she always says. This law will harm the most vulnerable women in society.
Oh, shut
While
up.
J.K. Rowling is repeatedly trying
Fuck
to
up,
harm
you
some of the
fucking
most
cunt.
vulnerable in our
Bitch
society,
cunt.
aka trans people.
Douche.
Those seeking help after
She'll call you
violence,
misogynist for that.
rape, and incarcerated women.
Out-of-touch TERF bitch who wants to
so-
murder trans people.
Trans people can face male violence. Okay? Trans people are more likely to be sexually assaulted. So why couldn't they seek help as well? Statistics show that imprisoned women are already far more likely to have been previously abused. What does this have to do with anything at all? Again, she's just assuming that trans people are going to go on some, like, rape rampage. It's really fucking
Because she's a
disgusting.
misandrist, too, along with being a
that
TERF.
was J.K. Rowling's brainlet take. She probably didn't even read what the new legislation was. She probably just saw that it was going to be more accepting of trans people, got really triggered, and then tried to weaponize her bigotry by hiding behind, oh, well, the poor women, ooh. And then, this is what nobody saw coming. The beef with Vaush. The man, the myth, the legend. Vaush.
That moment when you make Vosh look good
He
for
made
once,
this
that's
tweet.
pretty big.
All J.K. Rowling had to do was shut the fuck up, and she could have been almost uncritically beloved for like a century.
Yes.
Women be quieter and start apologizing challenge. Now, right off the bat, I have a few critiques for Vosh here. Now, as a follower of his content, as somebody who has spoken to Vosh, I recognize, especially this second tweet, that he's being funny. He's just being...
Dude, I don't know about you, but I don't like Vosh anymore, yet I can realize it's a joke. Like, come the fuck on.
I know he does not actually believe that all women need to be quiet and start apologizing.
This reminds me of the same crap
I know
people
that,
gave
of course.
Colin Moriarty years ago for.
Unfortunately, though, not everybody knows that. And
Because
this is
they're
why
idiots.
It's sometimes really important to just be mindful of optics and the way that you're delivering your message when it comes to putting this stuff out there, because there are people outside of your insular community that can read this a very different way. And so
I would say they're idiots if they do think that.
Posted this tweet of Vaush and said, "What you and your ilk fail to appreciate is how tediously familiar I find your tactics." Oh boy, we're going to some Lord of the Rings battle here. "I had a violent ex-husband who used to tell me life would be great if only I'd comply. But you're making the same mistake he did. Women like me can't be bullied out of resistance."
The joke went right over her head.
Recognizing her own abuse
Fucking
to try and
idiot.
bludgeon trans people. Really fucking disgusting. What J.K. Rowling suffered at the hands of this violent ex-husband is very sad. It should be condemned. It is in no way acceptable. But your abuse does not justify your bigotry. It's quite simple. And the other issue that I have with Vaush's tweet here is that the whole TERF narrative seems to be that the desire to accept trans people is rooted in some kind of sexism. Now, of course, we know that that's bullshit, but Vaush's goofy tweet here, unfortunately, plays right into that stereotype. It gives people like J.K. Rowling fodder for her dipshit opinion that the acceptance of trans people, or that this movement, this trans rights movement, is somehow rooted in hatred for real women. It's
That is unfortunately true.
Vaush has some excellent arguments against TERFs and against J.K. Rowling, but when he makes edgy tweets like this, it unfortunately plays right into the stereotype that Rowling and TERFs all over the world have already assigned to this group of individuals, the type of people fighting for trans rights. But yeah, this is something that I just did not see coming. When I first saw this on Twitter, I was like, holy shit, J.K. Rowling is tweeting Vaush? This is insane. So Vaush responded. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to fully ratio her because she got 86k likes and he got 32k likes. But I like what his response was. "Listen, Joanne, you don't get to play the victim card when you're the advocate for taking away women's rights here. Trans women are raped and killed in men's facilities, and you want to keep them there because of your trauma. Quit making your feelings other people's oppression."
Oh, I don't think she's gonna recover from that one.
Much better than the first tweet, I'll say. And yeah, unfortunately, a failed ratio. I liked and retweeted. Vaush, I did everything I could.
I mean, it's not really a surprise. Like, look how big J.K. Rowling probably is on Twitter compared to Vaush. I mean, it's not to be surprised.
Try to help you, turn her into J.K. ratio. But no, alas, I failed. And Vaush is speaking, he really is speaking facts here. It is true that trans women are far more likely to be abused in men's facilities. They're far more likely to be abused in the male restrooms, for example. But again, J.K. Rowling doesn't care about any of this because she hides behind this facade of caring about the victimized women. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is Blair White.
Oh no, not Blair White, no!
Oh, we know exactly what the fuck she is going to say.
You see? I'm actually, I support all the bigots, you see, because I'm one of the good ones. Hey, King.
I'm self-loading trans.
I agree with you.
It totally doesn't have transgender people that I've murdered in my
That's
house.
That's Blair White's entire shtick. Just licking the boot as it crushes her skull.
That's what Blair White does.
As they lead her into a death camp. That's Blair White's entire brand.
It would not surprise me if she's literally got
J.K. Rowling at one point
transgender
also
people in her basement.
Yes, sweetheart, I'm staying right here on this hill, defending the right of women and girls to talk about themselves, their bodies, and their lives in any way they damn well please.
Unless they're
I have
trans.
no idea what this has to do
Yeah,
with
unless they're
people.
trans, in which case she wants
Can
them
also
to
talk
die,
about
and in
themselves,
fact,
their bodies, and their
I
lives?
suspect she has murdered a few
Believe
of
it or not,
them.
trans women also have lives. They have bodies too, J.K. Rowling. How is trans people existing
Yep,
affect
I
women and
mentioned the
girls
people
talking about
exist,
themselves?
JQ Rowling.
It just seems like a massive leap. You worry about your legacy, I'll worry about mine. Winky face. Wow, roasted. And then Blair White.
Here we go for
She
pain.
shows up like the cretin that she is, crawling up. Oh, I see somebody hating on trans people. I gotta go defend them. Blair White says, And those of us, I'll read it in her voice, okay? And those of us with a brain actually appreciate you so much.
Oh my
You've
God.
only further solidified your icon status, queen.
Oh jeez, God, Blair, that's sad for even
Oh
you.
my God.
J.K. Rowling
That
would
was
consider
Blair.
you
That
a
was
man.
bad even for you.
Yes!
Want you
That was bad
in a
even for
women's
you.
facility.
And you're already
And
a
they would
despicable cunt. Jeez.
Careful, she might call you.
Take J.K. Rowling to J.Q. Rowling to murder you, Blair.
Oh
Seriously.
my God. But those are summer camps I'm going to, don't you know?
See you as a danger and potential rapist to real women everywhere. That is what J.K. Rowling thinks about you. Why the fuck are you over here simping nonstop for this crazy lady and claiming that she's further solidified her icon status?
It's as though she completely forgot about her debate last year with the red ice bitch and John Doyle, remember? Oh God, that was horrible.
This is a level of cuckoldry that I did not think was possible. This is unfathomable to me. I had no idea that somebody could be this much of a fucking cuck and still be supported by the right wing. You know, I thought the right hated
Wait till you meet Rave Dubin very soon.
people that were
yeah.
spineless, didn't stand up for themselves, and cucked left and right for people that hated them. Isn't the right wing all against, like, Republicans sucking up to the Democrats type shit? So why are they okay with Blair White literally sucking up to the woman that would want to strip her of her rights? So, yeah, just a lot of crazy shit going on, you know. I think that everybody's just slowly but surely losing their minds. But yeah, that's J.K. Rowling versus Vaush. A couple of critiques that I have for Vaush, as well as Blair White simping for the lady who would gladly take away Blair White's rights if she had the chance to. Hilarious. In every conceivable fashion. But hey, that's what happens when you're a brain-dead simp. Don't forget to
And a turf too. So, despite us not liking Vosh, we gotta say about his epic destruction of J.K. Rowling.
Epic. It was epic.
Oh, and oh my God, the last few days on his channel, he's had to deal with nothing but people crying about him being a misogynist in his channel. It's so sad. He even did like a 50-minute video I just watched today of him destroying these idiots earlier today. It's so pathetic and sad.
Yeah.
But hey, Vosh, shows you that's why we were mentioned earlier. There are a lot of dumb, stupid leftists, even in the trans community, that are just brain-dead turfs. And these people need to be called out for the idiots that they are. And
Yes.
so, cry more, Roland. That's all we gotta say. Cry more. And if you did listen to Vosh's advice and shut up, you would have been beloved for a century because of Harry Potter. But now even the community hates you because of your big fat mouth.
And now everyone hates you and wants you dead.
Alright, so that was a good funny laugh, but now they get into something a little bit more serious. What produces the most CO2 emissions in America? So, I think it was last episode remember we watched that video from, I can't remember what it's pronounced, but it's a German name, about, the combat climate change? And I said before they did a video on what produces the most CO2 on average and how to combat it. I've been spending the last week looking for it, but I just can't find it. I went through every single one of their climate change videos. I can't find that video. But I did found something that would be just as efficient if you go on EP Stuff to Read or Listen, and it's from the EPA about total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector in 2019. So yes, it is 3 years old, and yes, it's American-centric, but I'm sure most developed countries are probably going to have similar results. So, according to the economic sector, this is the biggest CO2 emitters in America. 29% of it is transportation, 25% is electricity production, 23% is industry, 13% is commercial and residential, whatever that could be, and then finally the last 10% is agriculture. So, I think we should go into these topics and figure out, each one of these and figure out which ones we can effectively lower to lower the CO2 emissions to combat climate change. So, of course, the biggest one, pretty much no surprise, is transportation. So, cars, planes, trains, boats, and stuff like that. Because that is going to be, especially cars. Cars are the biggest emitters in the world because there's billions of them in the world. And, like, everyone uses them. Like, they're, like, the most common thing people use for transportation and stuff like that. Well, we do have electric cars being made. But, unfortunately, they're not proficient enough yet. They're not out in full...
Short mid-range, like, mid-range, they're pretty good now. The main thing prohibiting at the moment is cost is the prohibitive bit.
I was actually talking about that they're just not being used enough yet.
True.
So, yeah, we gotta get more of them out there. We gotta lower the cost and all that, and we gotta eventually make gas-powered cars banned in terms of sales, which a lot of countries are doing, but unfortunately most of them are doing it way too slow in all of them. Like a few decades and more stuff like that. But we are getting there when it comes to cars. Now, trains are the best thing because we already have electric trains for over 100 years. So, and also,
a lot of our trains in Australia are electric.
Yeah, and also trains deliver more cargo for how much CO2 they use compared to everything else. So they're the most greenest transportation we have, and we already have the technology to make them electric, and we already have them like in Europe, and especially Japan with the Shikashin, the bullet trains, which is why I said for years, we need to go to them to bring that shit over here. And it's not just that, too. There's also Maglev, if you heard that. Trains that run on magnets. Magnetism that move. Which China right now has the only passenger line that's Maglev in the world, if I remember correctly. We tried to get that from Baltimore to DC when I was a kid. That didn't work out. And of course, for years, California's tried to get them with no luck. So yeah, we already have trains that can run on green energy. We just gotta rebuild the infrastructure across the world so you can run them more and stuff like that. Now, boats. Now, technically, historically, we all know boats were green because all they relied on is on wind. But of course, we can't. No boat can rely on that efficiently. We need to be able to make a move beyond the wind and all that. But unfortunately, they're like in a lower stage, like when it comes to cars, where there's not really much green technology for it. Now, I remember Kyle covered back in 2014 that America's Navy did have a ship that was powered by algae. So that is a possibility for ships. Now we just gotta make it more proficient to the level like where cars are right now. So boats have a possibility to fix that. And unfortunately, last one is planes. Planes, from what I've read up, there is no way to make them green right now. It'd probably be decades before that would even be a possibility right now.
Yeah.
So, but planes are also at the same time, like, I think the least, outside of trains, like the least CO2 emitters of all the transportation because they're not used that much compared to, like, all the other ones. But yeah, these numbers that 29% can easily be chipped away with trains, cars, and boats, hopefully over time. Planes will take a little bit while, but that would be... I would be surprised if the vast majority of that 29% is from cars, because cars are the worst of all transportations. We could easily fix that 29%. Alright? Now, of course, the next one on the list is electricity production. It's not electricity itself. Electricity is clean, for all of you that don't know. The electricity is not the problem. It's what's producing the electricity is the problem. And, of course, like I said about electrifying trains, that would cause the electricity cause the CO2 to go up. But we have ways to fix that. Just do green sources of energy. Wind, solar, water, geothermal or whatever, nuclear. We have a whole bunch of options we could do. We just gotta make them more proficient and use them a lot more. So we can knock that 25% down easily. Now that industry, the 23%, I'm sure some of that is also oil because that's an industrial good that's made and produced and all that. But not exactly sure what they mean by necessarily... industry, because it could be a whole bunch of different things, but I'm sure there could be some sort of regulations to fix that to make it cleaner, but I don't know much about lowering that number really yet. Commercial and residential, I'm not exactly sure necessarily what that could be either, other than maybe like powered and stuff like that, so I don't know about that one. And unfortunately, the 10% agriculture, I don't think that's anything we can fix right now, since we need agriculture to eat and all that, and unfortunately it's a big CO2 emitter, as we've seen on, I've seen on that one video that I can't find yet. And unfortunately, outside of drought-resistant crops and lab-grown meat, which both unfortunately are very, very into like development stage. They're nowhere near proficient enough to even use that yet. So unfortunately, that 10% is probably not going to go away anytime soon. So that's, of course, when it comes to... Oh, let's read the actual thing right here. Transportation, 29% of 2019 greenhouse gas emissions. The transportation sector generates the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions in America. Greenhouse gas emissions from transportation primarily comes from burning fossil fuels for our cars, trucks, ships, trains, and planes. Over 90% of fuel used for transportation is petroleum-based, which includes primarily diesel and gasoline. So in 2019, over 90% of cars, transportation is powered by fossil fuels. So we need to fix that eventually. 25% is electricity production. Electricity production generates the second largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. Approximately 62% of our electricity comes from burning fossil fuels, mostly coal and natural gas. Yeah, unfortunately, America is not good in this regard, because that video... Oh, no, it was a different video where they talked... That channel we watched talked about, like, how good nuclear power is safe or not. And actually showed, like, France, for example, as, like, the best green energy production in the world. Like 70% of their energy is from green sources, mostly just from nuclear. So if France could get to 70% right now, we could easily get there. That would be massive help. Industry, 23%. Greenhouse gas emissions from industry primarily comes from burning fossil fuels for energy, so that sounds more like an electrical thing, as well as greenhouse gas emissions from certain chemical reactions necessary to produce goods and raw materials. Okay, there's ways to maybe fix that somewhat. Commercial and residential. Greenhouse gas emissions from businesses and homes arise primarily from fossil fuels burned for heat, which I figured. The use of certain products that contain greenhouse gases and the handling of waste. Figured. I had a feeling it was going to be a lot of heat, because I actually remember seeing a map on Wikipedia that showed like yearly CO2 emissions. A big chunk of CO2 emissions come from the northern hemisphere in the winter. Surprisingly, it wasn't the summer. That was really weird. But I guess not surprised when you're trying to warm up homes and all that and burning coal. Alright, agriculture. 10% is from agriculture. Greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture comes from livestock such as cows, agriculture, soils, and rice production. Well, like I said, there's not much you could do about that until we make lab-grown meat or drought-resistant crops more proficient. And then there's another one, too, right here. And here's another one here, right, too. Land use and forestry, 12% from 2019 greenhouse gas emissions. Land areas can act as a sink, absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere, or a source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Since 1990, managed forests and other lands are a net sink. They have absorbed more CO2 from the atmosphere than they emit. Which is true. So... I'm sure you remember this too from watching Potholer 54, whatever his number was, about CO2 emissions. Earth itself produces way more CO2 than us. Like we produce, I think it actually is true when he covered it that humans produce. It was like 3%.
3.4% average, but that's on top of the normal thing. And in the last 200 years, we've added about 50% to greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere.
Because I could have swore he'd covered a video to talk about, like, do humans really contribute only 3% of the world's emissions?
Yeah.
And he covered that it actually is true, but the difference is that the emissions that Earth produces, it can also cover it, like get rid of it.
Yeah.
Whereas the amount that we put in overrides it.
Yeah.
Like a,
yes. I said, we're adding that 3.4% to it.
Yeah. So the Earth can handle the CO2 it creates, but it can't handle the extra that we add on, and that's the problem. Yeah. Our little bit is too much. So let's see, emissions and trends. Since 1990, gross U.S. greenhouse gas emissions has increased by 2% from year-to-year. Emissions can rise and fall due to changes of the economy, the price of fuel, and other factors. In 2019, greenhouse gas emissions decreased compared to 2018 levels. That's good before even COVID. The decrease was primarily in CO2 emissions from fossil fuel combustion, which is results from multiple factors, including decrease in total energy use and the continued shift from coal to less carbon-intensive natural gas and renewables. So let's see, in 1990, it said total greenhouse gas emissions in million metric tons in America was, like, looks like 65,000 million tons or whatever, and 2019 looks about the same, if not maybe a little bit less. Because back in 2007, looks like before the Great Recession, it was over like almost 7,500. So it's gone down 1,000 from its peak, but it looks like it's almost near 1990 levels. So I mean, that's a good thing, I guess. I would be more interested to see what would be right now after COVID, because remember how massive CO2 emissions went down in the world. Because I remember RT covered that at its peak, America produced the lowest amount of CO2 during COVID since 1983, which is really, really needed. But of course, I'd like to see how it maintained that afterwards. We need to find more stuff on that. So yeah, we got to see about this. I'm sure the stats pretty much apply to most of the developed world.
Generally, it would be. I'd say the contribution for trains would be a lot lower in Australia, since most of our trains are electric now.
But yeah, we got to see about the combat and these percentages.
It's a good plan.
Like 29% transportation, I'm sure we could fix a good chunk of that. Electric, we could fix, I don't know how much, but we could fix a chunk of that. Industry, probably a little bit. Commercial, a little bit. Agriculture, unfortunately, is not going to be done anytime soon. Now, if only we knew the exact percentages of what's producing, like, electricity and what's the most transportation in America, that way we could see the exact numbers we're looking at, maybe cutting. But possibly, maybe, good estimate, maybe 30 to 40%. Maybe if we're lucky, 50% of CO2 emissions could be easily fixed right now.
Yeah.
Alright, so that was basically the gist of the video I was finding, which sucks I couldn't find it, but yeah. We need to fix this and combat climate change. Alright, so now, on to the next topic. Oh, geez. This was actually a month ago, I think, and Kyle covered it. Ron Desantis crying about face masks again, as the right always does. Oh, Jesus Christ. Let's watch this as he was crying at kids wearing masks. Fucking idiot.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis snapped and lost it and started berating some kids for wearing masks. So
Quote
Evan
more.
Donovan says, New Governor Ron DeSantis annoyed with USF students, quote, "You do not have to wear those masks. Please take them off. Honestly, it's not doing anything. We've got to stop with this COVID theater, so if you want to wear it, fine, but this is ridiculous."
Funny thing about that, I actually just watched the video from Hunter Avalon earlier when he was doing a live stream, and he was dealing with some idiot anti-vaxxer, I think it was, and he actually looked into stats about face masks. Apparently, on average, face masks prevent up to 70% chance of getting COVID.
Nice.
They don't do anything. Well, that 70% reduction begs to differ.
So the way I reread that is actually way too soft compared to how he did it. So let me play the video for you here.
You do not have to wear those masks. I mean, please take it off. Honestly, it's not doing anything. We got to stop with this COVID theater. So if you want to wear it, fine, but this is ridiculous.
I hate to break the news to you, DeSantis, but just so you know recently, because Mike covered it too, that there's another big wave of COVID now happening in Europe. I'm sure a lot of it's also because of the Russo-Ukraine War. But guess what? There is still a spike going on in Europe, and I'm sure that'll eventually come to here too. So, no, it's not theater.
Yeah.
COVID is still going,
South
dumbass.
Korea's numbers are absolutely taking off.
Yeah, China too as well recently.
China's numbers are well up. New Zealand, their numbers have skyrocketed as well.
In fact, I think
they're up, I think, 20. Not too now.
In fact, I think one of the sources I've been reading about the Russo-Ukraine War covered China's spike, and I think they said it was the highest it was ever recorded, which is insane.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah, 20,000 in New Zealand.
They have, and don't they have like less population than my state even?
Oh yeah, they've only got like 5 million people. But they've had their case. Yep.
That's a lot.
Yeah, their numbers. They're even China's hovering around 2,000 to 3,000.
When my state has more population than New Zealand, that makes it worse for them because that's a lot more infection spread.
USF.
Wow. Honga's got 258 cases. And they, if I remember correctly, Honga until, like, yeah, Oh, wow. Yeah. Tonga is getting cases now.
Really
And
pissed.
until like November 2021, they had 0 cases of coronavirus.
Not like at the beginning you could see the kids kind of joking and or thinking it's a joke and they're like laughing along with him. But then he get like his tone gets like more and more serious and more
We've got
degrading.
another outbreak even in Antarctica. Even Antarctica's being hit.
Have to wear those masks. I mean, please take it off. Honestly, it's not.
But remember, it's a political feeder in a Chinese hoax, remember?
Yep.
Fucking
No,
dumb.
Anthony Fauci funded and created bioweapon, remember?
Yep.
We got to stop with this focus theater. So if you want to wear it, fine, but this is ridiculous.
Coat more.
All right. Well, it's good to be at USF.
Now, I don't know. Some people are probably going to say like this was pre-planned, like he was doing it on purpose, but it doesn't make him look good. In fact, it makes him look really shitty.
Makes him like a
he seemed
fucking
like he was
whiny
genuinely
baby.
pissed off. Let me see one. I want to see it one more time.
You do not have to wear those masks. I mean, please take it off. Honestly, it's not doing anything. We got to stop with this focus theater. So if you want to wear it, fine, but this is ridiculous.
All right. Well, it's good to
Fucking
be at USF.
whiny cunt.
I love like the breathing out as if like
Antarctica to the list.
as if like I'm the adult in the room and I have to take charge and tell people what's up and tell people what's right.
Yeah, which is why not only am I going to tell you to not wear a mask, but I'm also going to tell you that you can't say gay.
And it's like, nah, dude, you just sound like a douche. You just sound like an idiot. Now, by the way, I feel like this clip is indicative of a trend that I've seen fairly recently, which is this idea that conservatives are sort of stealing the health regulation thing in reverse. So, there were all these laws at different times throughout the pandemic of, you have to wear the mask, so there's, mask mandates, and at certain corporations, there were, vaccine mandates, you need to get it if you want to work here, so on and so forth. But the stories had come in over time of, a restaurant in Texas or something that mandates that you can't wear masks. That you can't even freely choose to wear a mask.
So much for freedom and personal choice and individual responsibility.
Some family went to a restaurant and they were wearing masks because their kid is immunocompromised. And then a waiter came over and said, "Listen, you got to take those masks
off." In the end, so
off, or my, the owner of the business here is going to kick you out. He really doesn't like this stuff. He doesn't like this.
Cry more.
COVID theater stuff. And it's like, think about that. The argument from a lot of conservatives is that these health regulations are authoritarian, and that's why they say they don't like them. But then they turn around and they want to do the mirror image authoritarianism, which is like, I sort of want to force you to not wear a mask. I will berate you if you do wear a mask, even if you're freely choosing to wear a mask based on the evidence that you've seen about the pandemic and your own calculation. Now, I know DeSantis has a line in here where he's like, if you want to wear them, fine. But clearly he's super smug and dismissive of it and angry at the thought that maybe some of these kids would choose to wear a mask. So, I mean, it'll be interesting though. I don't know, man. I feel like this stuff, it makes, obviously, liberals and leftists laugh at him. And it sort of makes normies go, DeSantis is kind of a dick. But who knows, maybe it plays well with, the Republican base.
Well, of course it's going to appeal to them, but it's not going to appeal to the rest of us.
Because they were wearing a mask at an indoor event during a pandemic. I don't know, we'll have to see. I mean, I can only think of 412 different times where Trump did something and everybody thought, oh, this is going to hurt him in the polls. Then he'd go up 5 points in the polls because the Republican base is like, yes, we love it when you're so unreasonable, yes. So I don't know, man. I don't know how this is going to play. I will say that at CPAC, this past weekend, or this past week, whenever it was, I don't really remember. My brain doesn't work anymore. You had Trump won going away when he was included in the poll. So he got 59%. Of all the different options, he got a majority, 59%, in the CPAC straw poll. But then when you take Trump out of the equation, DeSantis got 61%. So he is a clear, second favorite behind Trump. If Trump doesn't run or can't run.
Honestly, if anything, he might even be worse than Trump because he actually might get the appeal of normies, whereas Trump scares them away.
For whatever reason, he's a huge
wonder
favorite.
for me.
My God, even my fucking dumbass aunt who hates Trump immensely likes DeSantis, even though they're the same fucking person.
But honestly, as long as Trump's in the picture, DeSantis has a very difficult task. Like, he has to thread the needle perfectly. He has to find a way to be pro-Trump, because a lot of Trump's base likes DeSantis, and they go to DeSantis if it's not Trump, right? He has to find a way to be pro-Trump enough where the Trump base still likes him, but anti-Trump enough where he can still keep the normies. So that's like the Glenn Youngkin approach, you know? And
it works from personal experience.
Like, what the hell position can DeSantis take on January 6th and stop the steal? That's going to, like, appease the Trump masses who are all in on, like, it's a hoax, it's a conspiracy.
I bet if we looked into it, I'm sure he probably thinks that the big lie is indeed real and downplayed January 6th. I wouldn't be surprised if we looked that up and if that was indeed the case.
But also keep the normies, who actually, normies are very dismissive of anybody who entertains the January 6th conspiracy theories. I mean, we've seen polls, it's overwhelming. Like, all the normies in the country are like, shut up about January 6th and a rigged election. So he has a difficult task. And it'll be interesting to see if he can navigate it. But he's clearly a strong second behind Trump. And moments like this, while I'm inclined to say it's going to hurt him because he looks like a douche, at the same time, you know, being a douche is sometimes not even really a strike against you in Republican politics. So
it never is. It never was.
This video is quite eyebrow-raising, if I don't say so myself.
Other than him being an asshole to kids for no reason. So what do you say about DeSantis coping and crying about masks again as always?
Of course, he does, because he's pro-disease, and even though we are, yes, we're in that transition period, people who still want to wear masks should be wearing masks.
Like me.
And you don't have to, and you shouldn't have to be like the way you do it.
If you want.
Yeah.
If you want to wear a mask, go ahead. If you don't want to, go ahead. If you don't want to vaccinate, go ahead. If you do want to get vaccinated, go ahead, although you should. But it just shows that the Republicans and conservatives are always a bunch of whiny hypocrites. Alright, now this one actually is a month old. I was incorrect about the DeSantis one. I wanted to cover this, but I wanted to focus more on the Russo-Ukraine War. So anyways, we've been trying for like the last several years to ban stock trading, and of course, it's not just Republicans that are against it. It's also whiny Democrats are against it. And I have never watched this video from a month ago, so now this is the first one for me. Here we go, back to Kyle.
One of the things that is so unbearable and insufferable when it comes to our political class, the ruling elites, is how detached they are. How they lose all touch with reality and common sentiment when they're in that ivory tower for too long. Well, we have a great example of that right here, so take a look at this. Democratic lawmaker calls bipartisan effort to ban stock trading among lawmakers bullshit. Wow. Wow. So let me show you some more here from the article itself. So my thoughts on it, you know, I think this whole concept is bullshit, because I think that why would you assume that members of Congress are going to be inherently bad or corrupt?
Because they are.
We already have the Stock Act that requires people to report stock trades. So you're allowed to be corrupt, you just have to report it. Why would you assume, I mean, the people that you're electing to represent you, it makes no sense that you're going to automatically assume that they're going to use their position for some nefarious
They do.
to benefit themselves. So I'm very strongly opposed to any legislation like that.
Cope.
Elaine Luria, Luria, Democrat of Virginia.
So
those were her comments. Now, here's the most important point. She's like, why would you assume that we're corrupt? Nobody's assuming anything. We have the evidence. We have a mountain of evidence on it, whether it's Nancy Pelosi's husband's various stock trades that happen to perfectly coincide with Nancy Pelosi knowing things behind the scenes about what legislation is
like what happened when COVID pandemic became full-blown 2 years ago.
She's made tens of millions of dollars. They've made tens of millions of dollars by being corrupt. They always beat the market. They always beat the market because they have the insider information. There are whole groups of people now who invest based solely on what Nancy Pelosi does because they know she's going to beat the market. Business Insider had a very detailed report that came out. We covered it on this show where they lay out, hey, here's the number of politicians who are violating the Stock Act. Here's the number who definitely are violating. Here are the people who are in some sort of weird middle ground, and here are the people who are not doing it. And there's so many of them that are trading based off insider information, and they almost always beat the market. So there's evidence of it. There's evidence of it. Here's another great example. Tom Price, who was Trump's former head of Health and Human Services, he invested in I think it was a medical device company as he was pushing legislation through that would have increased the stock of the medical device company that he just invested in. Everybody knows the famous story. This is one of the reasons why Perdue and Loeffler lost in Georgia to Ossoff and Warnock, because Perdue and Loeffler were in on a nefarious meeting behind the scenes right before the stock market crash that was because of COVID, and they were told, this thing is serious, you might want to do a little something in terms of your own wallet, and so they all cashed out and were not there for the crash. I mean, guys, if the Stock Act is just, hey, you need to report how corrupt you are, okay, transparency is good, but you shouldn't allow the worst thing and just report on what you're doing. No, ban it, get rid of it. And so she acts like, why would you assume we're not assuming anything. We know you're doing it. We have the numbers.
Careful, Kyle. She might call you a misogynist very soon for that one.
I mean,
Oh, well.
look at how entitled this is.
Back
Look at how entitled this is. Now, these guys turn around. I mean, Dan Crenshaw, what did he say? He came out and said, well, you're not going to get anybody to run for office because how are we going to improve ourselves? If we're not allowed to improve ourselves, how's that going to work? You want to improve yourself? You want to care about just your bottom line and your money? Go pick a different field. This is called public service for a reason. You're supposed to be serving the public. That's what you're there for. Now, by the way, I would have no issue whatsoever with increasing the pay of these people in Congress. It depends whether you're a congressman versus a senator, you know, how much money you make. Some, I think, 180 or something for some of them, and some are, I think, over 200 or whatever. I think the president's 400,000. I would have no problem with raising the amount of money they get paid, but I would ban them from doing any sort of investments, from their family from doing any sort of investments whatsoever. I ban the revolving door, which is like as soon as these people leave Washington, D.C., they go cash in with some corporation and become a lobbyist. And the reason why the lobbyists hire them is because when they were a politician, they would do their bidding. So you give them a tax cut, or you give them a subsidy, or you fight for them, for this company, instead of the people, and then they pay you afterwards and pay you $1 million or $2 million a year to sit on your ass all day and call yourself a lobbyist. So I would ban the revolving door. Look, if you do public service, do public service. Do public service. I wouldn't even do just a 10-year ban. I do a lifetime ban. But I have no problem paying public servants more and trying to make them like corruption-proof and banning all the different sorts of corruption. And you guys know me. This is maybe one of my more unpopular opinions. Although I don't know, a lot of you guys seem to like it. I would treat corruption, I would punish it like it's one of the worst felonies. I would punish it right up there with
we actually did cover
rape
that.
And murder and grand larceny and all sorts of stuff. Assault. Because over time, this is what degrades a nation. She's like, oh, why would you assume that we're not... We're not assuming. We know. And by the way, if you look at the approval rating of Congress, it varies anywhere from 7% to 25%. You don't understand how despised you are and that this is one of the main reasons why? That it's very obvious. All you're doing is representing your donors, whether it's because of campaign finance stuff or whether it's because you're personally getting wealthy by investing and then affecting the stock price directly with the laws you pass. It's just astounding anybody would say this. Guys, for the campaign finance front, there was that Princeton study that said the U.S. is effectively an oligarchy and not a democracy. This came out like a decade ago. Nothing's changed in the right direction. If anything, we've gone further.
The U.S. is basically a corporate dictatorship.
Turned down the wrong direction. She has the nerve to say this. We're not inherently bad or corrupt. Nobody's saying you're inherently bad or corrupt. We're just saying you are bad and corrupt based on the evidence. Imagine having a victim complex over this. You are getting away with things that are brazen crimes that to any reasonable person they say that's a conflict of interest, not a problem. And you're playing the victim? God, kick her out of office, man. She's got to go. She's got to go. I mean, even Nancy Pelosi...
Careful, Kyle. Vosh will have a violent meltdown if you say that.
Was, forced herself to sound slightly more reasonable. This one's like, it's bullshit, you know, we're victims.
Because he's the member
You
of,
voted
he's
for
a
us,
member
you know,
of
you're
the
basically-
demon rat,
you're
of
getting
the
what you
corporate
deserve.
demon rat establishment.
No, because if all of our options are bad because the incentives of the system are bad, well, then we need to change the incentives of the system and totally change the system. Like, that's the thing. It's not... This isn't a judgment on the individuals. It's a judgment on the system. It is. This is like Michael Brooks' famous old quote, which I'm going to butcher now. Rest in peace to the great Michael Brooks. But he said, be kind to people, be hard on systems. Because, yeah, almost anybody in this position would act like this. That's not a problem with them. It's a problem with the system. Change the incentives of the system so you can't act like this. You don't, you know, take people at face value that they're going to act well, even though they're allowed to get away with so much wrongdoing. No, just change the fact that they get away with the wrongdoing. Okay, I think you guys get the gist of it. These entitled, spoiled, pampered little pricks, so out of touch. Yeah. This is why everybody hates Washington, and it's not even a partisan thing. This isn't left or right or anybody who cares about honesty and integrity in government.
Which conservatives still don't.
The answers are clear. Hey, y'all, do me a favor.
Yep, so an awesome video, and I hope she copes more about it. So what do you guys say about that?
Yeah. Cope and seize, bitch. Cope and seize.
Ban
and you
stock
won't
trading
get to be a corrupt
and
oligarchic bitch.
More. Careful, don't be calling you massages for that one. Alright, so we finally gone through all the topics. See you guys next time to keep more coverage on the Russo-Ukraine War and other idiots that we'll be covering next week. So see you guys next time.
See you next time.